Hello everyone, welcome to the Sleep History channel. The Rise and Fall of the Greatest Empire Introduction. The Dream of Eternal Power. Throughout human history, empires have risen with unstoppable force, dominating lands, cultures, and civilizations. They often believed themselves invincible, destined to rule forever. Yet, time has proven one harsh truth. No empire lasts forever. This is the story of one such empire, its glorious rise from obscurity, its golden age of unmatched power, and its inevitable fall into ruin. This is not just a tale of kings and wars, but of ambition, greed, unity, betrayal, and the fragile nature of human greatness. Long before it became the greatest empire the world had ever seen, it was nothing more than a small kingdom nestled between mountains and rivers. Its people were not wealthy nor were they powerful. They were farmers, blacksmiths, traders, ordinary individuals trying to survive in a harsh world. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in resilience. The early leaders of this kingdom understood something crucial. Survival depended on unity. While neighboring tribes fought each other endlessly, this kingdom built alliances. They traded instead of raiding. They negotiated instead of destroying. However, peace alone was not enough. As years passed, the kingdom began to strengthen. Its military, not out of aggression, but out of necessity. Enemies were always watching, and when the first invasion came, they were ready. The victory was decisive. It marked the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Every great empire has a turning point. And for this one, it came in the form of a leader unlike any before him. He was not born into luxury. He had seen struggle, poverty, and war. But he had a vision, one that extended far beyond the borders of his small kingdom. He believed in expansion, not just for power, but for unity. He dreamed of bringing different lands under one rule, creating stability where chaos once reigned. Under his leadership, the kingdom transformed. He restructured the army, introducing discipline and strategy. Soldiers were trained not just to fight, but to think. He built roads, allowing faster movement of troops and trade. He reformed laws, ensuring fairness and order. Then came the campaigns. One by one, neighboring territories fell. Some were conquered. By force, others joined willingly, attracted by the promise of stability and prosperity. Within a generation, the small kingdom had become a vast empire. Expansion became the empire's identity. Its armies marched across deserts, mountains, and seas. They faced fierce resistance, but their organization and discipline gave them an edge. The empire did not just conquer, it absorbed. Conquered peoples were not always enslaved. Instead, they were often integrated. Their cultures, languages, and traditions became part of the empire's identity. This diversity became one of its greatest strengths. Trade flourished as new routes opened. Cities grew into bustling centers of commerce. Wealth poured in from all directions. At its peak, the empire stretched across continents. It controlled trade routes, resources, and populations on an unprecedented scale. The world had never seen anything like it. The empire's golden age was a time of prosperity, innovation, and cultural brilliance. Art, science, and philosophy flourished. Great cities were built, filled with towering structures, libraries, and marketplaces. Scholars from different regions came together, sharing knowledge and ideas. The empire invested in infrastructure. Roads connected distant lands. Aqueducts supplied water to cities. Ports facilitated global trade. The economy thrived. Merchants grew wealthy. Farmers produced surplus crops. Citizens enjoyed a level of stability rarely seen in history, but perhaps the empire's greatest achievement was its ability to maintain order over such a vast territory. This was not easy. It required efficient governance, strong leadership, and constant vigilance. And for a time it worked perfectly. No empire falls overnight. The decline begins slowly, almost invisibly. For this empire, the first signs appeared during its peak. Wealth, once a source of strength, became a source of corruption. Officials began to abuse their power. Bribes became common. Loyalty shifted from the state to personal gain. The military, once disciplined and united, started to weaken. Soldiers became less motivated. Some joined for money, not honor. Others lost faith in leadership. Meanwhile, the vast size of the empire became a burden. Communication between distant regions slowed. Local governors gained too much power, often acting independently. Rebellions began to emerge. At first, they were small and easily crushed, but they revealed a deeper problem. The empire was no longer as united as it once was. As the central authority weakened, internal conflicts intensified. Power struggles became frequent. Generals, governors, and nobles competed for control. Alliances were formed and broken. Betrayal became a common tool. Civil wars erupted. These conflicts drained the empire's resources. Armies that once defended the borders were now fighting each other. The people suffered. Taxes increased to fund the wars. Trade declined. Food shortages became more common. Trust in the leadership eroded. The empire, once a symbol of unity, was now divided from within. While the empire struggled internally, its enemies grew stronger. Neighboring regions, once too weak to challenge it, saw an opportunity. They began to attack. Borders were no longer secure. Defenses were weakened. The once invincible army struggled to respond effectively. Some regions broke away, declaring independence. Others were conquered by external forces. The empire began to shrink. Each loss weakened it further, economically, militarily, and psychologically. Territories were lost, so were resources. Trade routes were disrupted. Revenues declined. The government struggled to maintain its infrastructure. Roads fell into disrepair. Cities deteriorated. Inflation rose. Currency lost its value. Prices soared. The common people suffered the most. Desperation spread. Crime increased. Social order began to break down. The empire's once thriving economy was now in crisis. The final days of the empire were marked by chaos and uncertainty. Leadership was weak. Short-lived rulers came and went, unable to restore stability. Each promised reform, but none succeeded. The capital, once a symbol of power, became a shadow of its former self. Enemies closed in. The final invasion was inevitable. When it came, the empire could not resist. The defenses collapsed. The capital fell, and with it the empire came to an end. Though the empire fell, its legacy lived on. Its culture, ideas, and innovations continued to influence the world. Languages spread. Laws inspired future systems. Architecture stood as a reminder of its greatness. History remembered it, not just for its power, but for its lessons. Conclusion: the cycle of power. The rise and fall of this great empire teaches us an important truth. Power is temporary. No matter how strong, no empire is immune to decline. Internal weakness, corruption, and division often prove more dangerous than external enemies. But within this story lies inspiration as well. From humble beginnings, a small kingdom rose to shape the world. It achieved greatness through vision, unity, and determination. And though it fell, it left behind a legacy that endured for generations. In the end, the story of the greatest empire is not just about its fall, but about what humanity can achieve at its peak and what it must avoid to endure. Final reflection: empires rise on discipline, unity, and vision. They fall on greed, division, and complacency. The question is not whether history will repeat itself. The question is, will we learn from it? When the empire finally collapsed, silence did not come immediately. Instead, chaos filled the void. Cities that once echoed with trade and celebration were now filled with smoke and ruins. The grand capital, once the heart of civilization, became a battlefield of fading resistance and victorious invaders. But what followed the fall was even more powerful than the war itself: the struggle of survival. People fled in all directions. Families were separated. Entire communities vanished overnight. The roads that once united the empire now carried refugees instead of merchants. In the absence of central power, local warlords emerged. Some claimed to restore order, while others simply exploited the chaos. It was not the end of violence, it was its transformation. The former empire fractured into many regions, each trying to redefine itself. Some provinces declared independence immediately, erasing every symbol of imperial rule. Statues of past emperors were torn down, imperial flags were burned. A new identity was desperately sought. Other regions remained loyal to the memory of the empire, refusing to accept its death. They still called themselves citizens of a fallen world, hoping for restoration that would never come. Trade between regions collapsed. Borders became dangerous zones controlled by armed groups. Once unified laws disappeared, replaced by local rule, often inconsistent and harsh. The idea of a single empire became a memory, then a myth. Among the ruins, there were survivors who remembered the empire at its peak. Old generals who once commanded vast armies now lived in silence, watching younger generations grow up without knowing what unity had felt like. Scholars tried to preserve knowledge. They collected damaged manuscripts, rebuilt libraries from ashes, and recorded oral histories of the Golden Age. Artists painted the fallen cities, not as they were, but as they once stood in memory. But even memory fades with time. A generation. Later, many began to question whether the empire had truly been as great as the elders claimed, or whether it was just a story told to make suffering easier to endure. History does not leave emptiness for long. As the old empire dissolved, new kingdoms began to rise from its remains. These new powers learned from the empire's mistakes. Some focused on smaller, more manageable territories. Others built strong defensive alliances rather than overexpansion. They studied the fallen empire carefully. What made it strong? What caused its destruction? From its military strategies, they adopted discipline. From its governance, they learned structure. From its collapse, they learned caution. In many ways, the empire that fell became the foundation of everything that came after. Its death was not an end. It was a transformation of global order. Centuries passed, and nature began reclaiming what humans once built. The imperial capital, once the greatest city on Earth, slowly turned into ruins buried beneath. Forests and soil, temples collapsed, roads cracked and disappeared under vegetation. Towers that once touched the sky became broken stones scattered across forgotten land. Travelers passing through the region spoke of strange echoes, stories of a city so vast it could hold entire nations within its walls. But few believed them, until explorers began to uncover the truth. Archaeologists found remnants of marble halls, inscriptions in ancient languages, and vast underground tunnels that once connected districts. Each discovery confirmed what had almost become myth. The empire had truly existed, and it had truly been athemus beyond imagination. As historians studied the ruins, they began to understand the deeper truth behind the empire's story. It was not just military strength that built it. It was organization, vision, unity of purpose. But it was also not just external enemies that destroyed it. It was internal decay, corruption, weakened trust, inequality created resentment, overexpansion stretched resources too thin, leadership became disconnected from reality. The same systems that built the empire also carried the seeds of its destruction. Every stone in the ruins seemed to whisper the same warning. Greatness without balance cannot last. Thinkers across generations debated the meaning of the empire's rise and fall. Some believed it was fate, that all empires are destined to collapse. Others argued it was human nature itself, ambition always exceeding wisdom. A third group saw it differently. They believed the empire failed not because it grew too large, but because it stopped evolving. At its peak, it became comfortable, and comfort, they said, is the silent enemy of progress. When leaders stop questioning, when systems stop adapting, decline becomes inevitable. Thus, the fall of the empire was not sudden. It was a slow surrender to stagnation. Even in distant future civilizations, traces of the empire remained. Modern governments borrowed its legal systems, architects studied its engineering, economists analyzed its trade networks. Military academies still taught its battle formations. But more importantly, political thinkers used its story as a warning. Whenever a nation grew too powerful, someone would inevitably ask, "Are we becoming like the old empire?" The answer to that question shaped policies, wars, and alliances for centuries. Over time, the empire transformed from history into legend. Children heard stories of emperors who commanded rivers of soldiers, of cities that glowed like stars at night, of libraries that held every knowledge of the ancient world. Some believed these stories were exaggerated, others believed they were symbolic. But a few still searched for the truth beneath the myth, and every discovery, no matter how small, brought humanity closer to understanding its own potential and its own danger. Chapter 20. Final Reflection. The endless cycle, the rise and fall of the greatest empire, is not just one story among many. It is a pattern repeated throughout history. A small power rises from struggle. It grows through unity and ambition. It reaches greatness. It becomes dominant. Then slowly it begins to weaken from within. New powers rise from its ashes, and the cycle begins again. Perhaps this is not tragedy, but nature, a reminder that nothing remains permanent, that every age of greatness carries within it the seeds of change, and that the true legacy of any empire is not how long it ruled, but what it taught the world after it was gone. Epilogue. The question left behind. Standing among the ruins of greatness, one question remains unanswered. If the empire had recognized its weaknesses early, could it have survived, or is collapse the price of greatness itself? History does not answer. It only repeats and waits for the next empire to rise. Among the ruins and legends there emerged a new kind of voice, one that did not glorify the empire, nor simply mourn it. It questioned it. Young scholars began to study the empire not as a sacred memory, but as a system of choices. They asked uncomfortable questions. Why did the leaders ignore corruption for so long? Why did the army become loyal to individuals instead of the state? Why did the provinces feel more like conquered territories than equal parts of a whole? These questions were dangerous in some regions. In others, they were revolutionary. For the first time since the fall, the empire was not just being remembered, it was being analyzed, and analysis changes everything. In one of the emerging kingdoms born from the empire's ashes, a movement began. It started quietly in academic circles, then spread into political discussions, and eventually reached the streets. The reformists believed something radical. If an empire can rise once, it can be rebuilt, but only if rebuilt differently. They did not want to restore the old empire. They wanted to learn from it. Their ideas included limiting central power, strengthening regional autonomy, creating transparent governance systems, rotating leadership positions, preventing lifetime rule at. First, rulers dismissed them as dreamers. But history had already shown what happens when dreams are ignored. Peace among the new kingdoms was fragile. Though they had learned from the empire's collapse, they had also inherited its divisions. Old rivalries reappeared, border disputes intensified. Trade wars replaced military wars, and slowly one kingdom began to rise above the rest. It did not call itself an empire, but its behavior was familiar. It expanded influence through alliances, it controlled trade routes, it placed loyal governors in neighboring regions under the promise of protection. The world began to whisper again. Is another empire forming? The memory of the past returned like a shadow. As power began to concentrate once more, philosophers, generals, and rulers gathered in councils across the world. A great debate emerged. Should unity be pursued again, or should fragmentation be preserved, forever to avoid another collapse? Two schools of thought formed. The centralists argued that only a strong, unified system could bring peace and stability. The decentralists warned that unity always leads to corruption, and eventual collapse. Neither side was entirely right. Neither side was entirely wrong, but the debate itself shaped the future. Historians studying the old empire uncovered a deeper truth that had been overlooked for generations. The empire did not fall simply because it became large. It fell because its growth outpaced its adaptation. Its systems were designed for a smaller world, yet it expanded into a vast one. Governance structures did not evolve fast enough. Communication systems became outdated. Decision-making slowed while problems accelerated. In essence, the empire's body grew faster than its mind. And when coordination fails in a system that large, collapse is only a matter of time. This realization changed how new civilizations thought about power. A new political philosophy emerged from this understanding. It was neither fully centralized nor fully fragmented. It aimed for balance. Power would be distributed but not scattered. Authority would exist, but with limits. Expansion would be allowed, but only if systems could adapt alongside it. This philosophy became known across the New World as adaptive governance. It did not promise eternal survival, but it promised something more realistic: sustainability. Deep within the ruins of the old capital, explorers discovered something unexpected: a sealed chamber. Inside it, a collection of writings believed to belong to one of the final rulers of the empire. His diary was fragmented, but powerful. One passage read, "I inherited an empire too large to understand and too fragile to control. I believed strength would hold it together. I was wrong." Another read, "The greatest danger is not the enemy outside the walls. It is the silence inside them, the silence of leaders who stop listening." And the final entry, "If history survives me, let it not remember my failure as weakness but as warning." The diary spread across the world. It changed how leaders thought about responsibility forever. For the first time in history, success itself became something to be carefully managed. Kings no longer dreamed only of expansion. They also dreamed of stability. Empires were no longer judged only by how large they became, but by how long they could maintain harmony. Growth without control was now seen as dangerous, and so civilizations began to design limits for themselves. Borders became flexible but regulated. Governments became powerful but accountable. And education systems began teaching not just how to build empires, but how to prevent their collapse. Centuries later, the old empire was no longer a political example. It had become a moral compass. When leaders faced decisions about war, expansion, or governance, they referred back to its story, not as a blueprint, but as a warning etched into history, a reminder that greatness is fragile, and that no system, no matter how powerful, is immune to time. The greatest empire was never just a nation or a territory or a dynasty. It was an idea. The idea that humans can organize chaos into order, that unity can rise from division, that ambition can build civilizations, but also that pride can destroy them. The empire rose because humans dared to dream beyond their limits, and it fell because they forgot those limits existed. Even today, every society carries the same potential within it: to rise, to expand, to achieve greatness, and to fall. The empire does not exist only in history books. It exists in every system, every organization, every nation, and even in individuals. Because the story of the greatest empire is not just about the world, it is about us. Epilogue. The cycle continues somewhere in a distant future. Another civilization will one day discover ruins of its own past greatness. They will study it, they will admire it, they will learn from it, and perhaps they will ask the same question once again: how did they fall? And in asking, they will stand at the beginning of their own empire's story. The cycle will continue, as it always has, as it always will.